Fire Emblem Engage is terribly absolute localization and translation. I also hear immediately that I'm not just talking about the lack of romantic endings that has been censored in the English version. I'm talking about straight up bugs. Stuff where a character actually says like 4 or 5 sentences and the text is like hello. Stuff like tooltips being wrongly translated so the mechanically doesn't make any sense. So actual like straight up bugs, that's how bad it is. Right? And then we also have a massive censorship issue. But first of all, let me point out here, right, that I have been a game developer for many years, and I have worked with localization and translation. For example, I translated a Turtles game, 700 lines of text. And so I think what my video can do for you guys here, I hope you can get some new insight, is that I will take apart in this video and explain how it is to actually work as a translator, localizer, or a localizer manager that I've been in the past. And hopefully get some more insight, right? And also why this game is clearly very agenda-driven. So hope you guys subscribe, press the like button for that, and let's talk about it. So first of all, I want to address how the game is just straight up buggy translation mess, right? We talk about the romance censorship later, because this actually is worse, in my opinion. So what I mean here is that there are several parts in the game where you have the character, if you speak Japanese, or even if you speak like, understand audio language, right? You will have many times in the game where the character will say like thanks or hello or whatever, right? So for example, a character might say like fell dragon, 1000-year war, blah 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 blah, war, right? And of course, if it was properly translated, it should have been something like we have been at war with the fell dragon for 1000 years. The divine dragon has to gang together and do this, blah blah. It's supposed to be a much longer sentence, right? Or several sentences. But several times in the game is writes like fell dragon 1000 years. And you're like, what happened here, right? Like even if you don't speak Japanese, you would understand that like 5, 6 like sentences is not like 1 or 2 English words. It doesn't make any sense. There's so many incidents of this. If you see me live stream the game, I live stream the whole maddening round, right? Blind maddening. I have commented on this many times as a person that speaks somewhat good Japanese, and I can understand Japanese when they're speaking, right? How often the dialogue has nothing to do with it. This image here, I took on purpose, of course, because this is kind of how it feels. So Rosada was speaking to Erika and might do like, oh, thank you for teaching me this thing, and it was very meaningful for me, right? That might be how the Japanese is. It's like, arigato, no, and it keeps going, right? And in English, it's like, thanks. And this feels just lazy. And this is a thing I've seen over 34 times in the game. So again, before even going into the censorship, the game is just badly translated. It feels lazy, right? It feels like they haven't translated, sir. One thing that's very common is when people are talking about like pain or stuff like that. So for example, oh, it hurts, my shoulder got shot and this thing happened and I am bleeding or so, right? They might be like arg, right? The translation just might be like, I'm in pain. It is very common that they remove all the nuance and it's basically like thanks, pain, suffering or whatever. It's one word, right? Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, a massive issue is that tooltips in the game are actually straight up wrong. For example, Chat 22, you have to pick up the emblem rings again on the ground. The tooltip has to tell you that you can only pick up the rings if you don't have a ring. It doesn't even matter emblem ring, it's any ring. And that is not how the game actually works. When I first read that tooltip, I was like, that can't be right, because obviously you're gonna play with S bond rings on this stage. So I can't do that. So I tried anyway, and it worked, right? So I would say here, maybe it's a design fault, right? Maybe the game designer would decide the mechanic, and then they wrote the text wrong in Japanese. Might be like that. I have, of course, worked with many designs in my life, and I've seen how the designers are usually people that have to write also the tooltip for the old mechanic. They might write it wrong, but given how terribly the text is in this game overall, I don't think so. I think that they have localized it wrong. And also it's wrong in 2 ways. It tells you can't pick up the emblems. If you have a ring, you can. And even if you have an emblem ring, you can pick up another emblem. You don't get it because it'll do it, right? So those kind of stuff for me are absolutely worse, because here the localizers are actually lying about the game rules, right? That is the most crucial issue you can have, right? Localization. Romance thing, coming to that soon here, is a big thing too. But like translating something and basically removing the rules are massive, right? So I was in Hearthstone, right? And if Hearthstone is badly translated, that's a terrible issue, right? Because you read the cards, and if you don't understand what the card is doing, right, that's going to be a massive issue for the gameplay, right? And that's an issue in this game. Several times the tooltips are actually objectively incorrect. But now then, let's talk about the censorship. This, of course, is a thing that everyone probably covered, right? So, for example, if you marry Ivy, you get an actual clear romantic ending, right? If you marry Yunaka, which also should also be another Yuri lesbian ending, right? Some people claim this is romantic. I read more than one article that do not list Yunaka as an actual romantic partner if you're playing as a female allure. But this ending is clearly romantic. She clearly wants to be with you. In Japanese, right? But in English, it's a little more like flirty. Another great example is Gold Mary. So Gold Mary is super thirsty. Like, Gold Mary is promiscuity, right? All her lines are like, oh, I'm so attractive, every month I have a lot of intercourse, all her lines are super sexually focused, right? Which is fine, of course, right? You're playing a video game with many playable characters, similar to Suikoden or whatever, right? You have many playable tactical characters, and of course some of them are gonna be more promiscuity, right? For example, in Suikoden you have Jean, the medical witch, which is quite, charming and attractive. Of course, she has a lot of intercourse, right? And Gold Mary in this game plays the woman that has a lot of fun time, right? And that's fine. And if you want to marry her, you're getting an experienced lady, right? Or, somewhat at least claiming to be. And that's kind of her role, right? In the English version of this game, she still is very, very thirsty. But I think it's fairly fair to point out that she is like, let's say, 4 out of 10 thirsty in the English text. And in the Japanese, she's like, 8 or 9. She's very, very into it. You know what I mean? And that's her character, right? So it's a lot of that stuff too, how they basically have nurtured and censored the characters, right? Oh, this woman is very, very sexually active. Oh, she's kinda active in English. And then we have Rosado, right? Rosado is Gold Mary's best friend, Potentia Gold Mary and Rosado. They all have this cute team, right? A kawaii team. So both Rosado and Gold Mary's passive are they're very, very attractive. So their attractiveness affects male enemies negatively, right? And I love this from a design standpoint, because it's kind of funny how, oh, this woman is, she's super horny, she charms men, got big oppa, she's like, oh, yeah. And her ability then affects her male enemy, because it's so, so attractive and so seductive and so on, right? Rosado is the same thing, right? So here again, it's weird when you play it, we compare the English and Japanese, and Rosado, not as thirsty as Gold Mary, but definitely in that kind of path, right? Rosado being a typical Otokonoku character, which commonly are tropely, in the tropes are very like sexually active, right? And that's clearly what Rosado plays on too. And yet their, dialogue is, again then, also very different, right? Where it's like, well, what Rosado said there in Japanese is definitely way more, etchy, kind of sexual focus, right? And in English, like, yeah, I guess it's kind of flirty, but... So, same thing there, right? Rosado might be, let's say, 5 out of 10 thirsty then, and it's like 2 out of 10 thirsty in English, right? That is like reducing what the cat's supposed to be, right? Rosado is supposed to be kinda slutty, in a like a better word, somewhat, right? And where Gold Mary is very, very, right? So, just that kind of alone is also a big issue. So Yunaka's ending, for example, some people don't see it as a romantic ending, because, again, it's censored. And this other character is supposed to be, a little more active, right? Or also censored, that the behavior is censored. Here's just a few characters that in Japanese have a straight up romantic ending. You marry them, where in English it's all gone, right? In English it's like, we're besties, right? We're best friends or whatever. And these characters are mostly the same age as the main character. It's also very frustrating, because people are gonna defend this by saying that, no, it's good that they censor it because of, Anna or so on, right? But they also censored like half the characters. So I agree that's kind of like an iffy thing there, right? Absolutely, I agree with that. But I think it's very important to point out that it isn't just that they removed Anna's the dialogue. They removed Rosa's dialogue, Alcur's dialogue, Lapis dialogue, Celine's dialogue, Etty's dialogue. You get my point. They removed so many, or completely rewritten so many characters, so they don't have any romantic feelings anymore for the player. And as I mentioned earlier, the characters that are very, very thirsty, like Gold Mary, while her ending is obviously like a marriage ending, because they probably just couldn't, right? Gold Mary is just an, again, active woman, right? It's very, very, you know, promiscuity. So I guess it couldn't really remove her lines, but so obviously you marry her and it's like a sexual marriage, but, you know, it still is like, it's reduced, right? It's reduced. So it's better that almost every character in the whole game, even character that about earlier, for example, Ivy's ending, right? Again, okay, this ending, both in English and Japanese, is clearly like a marriage with we're gonna have kids. If you beat the game and you marry Ivy, the game even tells you that you have children with Ivy, or you have grandkids or whatever, so on. It tells you that you impregnate her somehow. I guess the main character Futa. But anyway, my point is that, but even then, right, again, it is less, you know, romantic. It's less sexy, right? It's like, okay, we like each other. Let's have children, right? It still is like they're doing the best, right, to avoid it. But anyway, now let's talk about how you actually work as a translator, and I hope you get some insight. Okay, let me now give you some insight how this actually is to work in the industry, right? And why I absolutely think this is agenda-driven, right, from the people, whoever is doing translation or localizing it. Because the thing is that usually you don't even have the context to what you're doing. And that sounds strange, but what I mean is that, I was playing detail here, what I mean is that many times when I've done this in my own life, you just get like, here's all the dialogue. So for example, someone sends me like, translate what Anna is telling Allure, right? This is without playing the game. So I wouldn't have any context to what Allure and Anna age are, or how they look, or how they're saying. So for example, when I was in this Turtles game, I've done 3 Turtles games in my life, but one of them, this is the first game that happened to me. So I got an Excel sheet of like 700, I think it was 712, I believe, dialogue sentences, looking like this, right? So for example, I like you, I hate you, I'm so cute, yada yada yada, right? In English. And then it's my job then to go over here, right? And let's say I was doing Japanese or English, then I have to go in here and write what that is, you know, in Japanese. So I would be like, okay, that is Dai Suki, this is Dai Kirai, right? And so on. And I will go in there and write it, right? So I will sit here for 700 lines and just write that, right? Takes, of course, a few hours. It's like more than one workday. But that is actually how a lot of translation actually works in the game industry. Basically, you're hired to translate your language from the given source language, right? Now, of course, Fire Emblem would be Japanese to English, obviously. So, for example, it would be Daisuki, which means, you know, I like you. Ski is like I like, and Daisuki is like I love you, or I like you a lot, right? And Kirai is like I don't like you, and Dai Kirai is like I hate you, right? So that, for example, could be a word, right? And now, obviously, cute is kawaii, so I would write, you know, kawaii and so on, right? That's kind of how it goes, right? And again, what is very important to understand here is that, but that's happened in Turtles. Again, I don't have any, like, I don't have any understanding of the game, actually. I haven't even played the game. They just sent me like 700 rows, right, to translate. Like a row as in the Excel sheet. And I haven't ever played the game. I have no idea what's actually happening. So in a normal localization issue, and I really mean localization issue, you wouldn't even have any context to understand as a translator that Anna, or like Unica or whatever, right, is not, whatever they are, yeah. For example, Rosado, right? I would have no idea as a translator, most likely, that Rosado is an Otokonoko. I wouldn't even know that. I would just be like, Rosado is blah blah blah, telling the main character this thing. And I would just translate that, you know. Oh, well, in my language, I am thirsty is this thing, right? I would have no context of what it actually is. The character is, right? Like the age or the look of the character. I will have no idea the gender or whatever of the character. I'm just translating, you know, word by word, right? Of course, when you translated a whole sentence, you're trying to not just be like the exact words. Obviously, you're trying to make it, you know, work in your proper language, right? That difference between translation and localization is like, first of all, how does it fit into the actual language, right? So very, very uncommonly do you use like by word, you have to, of course, fix the sentence to work in your language, right? And some other times, maybe you have to translate like a song or something. Of course, you have to kind of be a little bit, how do I write it in my language and so on, right? And like, again, the important understanding is that usually you don't even have the context at all. So for example, a few years ago, when I was the manager then of this strategy game. I was creative designer, I was doing the QA and so on, right, and this stuff then as a side thing. We had this game being translated from English to English, Mandarin, Korean, German, French, Spanish, and what we did then is that we had to basically, right, I designed the game and I did most of, of the text in the game, right, like the mechanic and so on. So exactly like this, right, I had written the document of this, right, all the tooltips, all the mechanics, everything, right, I've written it down in text in English, and then I have this spreadsheet, just like this thing here, and then I share that, right, with translators I hired, right. So now I've hired, like a bunch of translators. I've hired a person who speaks Mandarin, a person who speaks Spanish, right, so on. Then I send them to them, right, and I just tell them that, okay, you are the Spanish translator, you're gonna just sit here and translate English to this, right, bam, 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 and do not touch the other columns, right, you're only doing Spanish, right. Then we have a Korean guy, he's doing that. We got a guy that is fluent in both, I don't know, let's say a guy is fluent in both Brazilian Portuguese and French, so he's doing both then, right? You get my point. So that's how it works, right? And then you sit there and do this, right? I don't care about their opinion about it, right? I don't care about their opinion. As a typical manager in this context, I'm just telling you, I have made a game, I have written all the text, right? Blah blah blah, and I want you to blah 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 in your language, and I don't want your input if this character is, too sexy or whatever, right? That honestly, I think that kind of weirds me too, because most of the time, right, as the localizer and translator, you don't even have any input. You basically just like, okay, this is what it means in my language, right? You just fill that shit in, send it back to me, right? Or is this like a live document, so I can see when you fill it up, right? And I pay you the money for that, and I don't care, right? You know what I mean? That's basically how the translation is. Then when you localize and QA test it, right, you send it to your testers, the build then, or the actual game, right? So this is what I mean. First of all, you translate the game, right, without even play the game, right? They haven't even seen the game. Now, in-house, or potentially you outsource it then, these people will now test it, right? The people that are testing it, they have to, of course, be like, oh, here's a bug because this word didn't fit, or this is a misspelling or whatever, right? So now they're going over that, right? So the translators aren't really, actually playing the game at all, right? There's not people doing that. And now they have to rewrite and so on. And that's clearly where Fire Emblem, I would say then, went wrong, right? So the translators probably just translated, again, like this, right? They had a document, and they just translated the text, right? That's what they are doing. Okay, so now the end localizers are actually playing the game, right? And it's their job to look at this kind of screen and, of course, be like, oh, what it says here, is that readable? Perceptive, yeah, that's correctly spelled, okay. Break defenses, that's correctly spelled, right? That's kind of their job, right? And this might be two different positioning, like the actual QA tester and the localized tester, language tester, or they might be the same person, right? Usually it depends on the money and so on, and studios. But basically, they are playing the game, right, and looking for faults in it. And so first of all, they failed immediately, right? Because as I mentioned, there are several bugs in the game, straight up bugs, which is like text here doesn't make any sense in English. So they clearly missed massive mistakes here, right? There are clearly many times where their audio keep going and the text isn't updating, right? So on. And that's not an issue. That's called audio mismatch. Usually that's why it's called. Basically, you have an audio and the text isn't corresponding to it. There's no feedback to the text, right? Audio mismatch. So they clearly ignored that. They ignored faulty tooltips and so on. So the actual people doing the QA, right, are terrible at the job. I'm probably saying they're terrible. This is shit, right? This is absolute shit. And follow on then. What I imagine here, right, again, how this probably happened, is that the localizers, right, sitting in whatever studio they have, if it's Nintendo or it's outsourced or whatever, right, they're sitting here now, right, they're playing the game, and they're like, oh, I think Gold Mary is, like, too horny, right? Let's rewrite Gold Mary. So she's like, still kind of thirsty, but not as thirsty. That's probably what happened there. So it basically happens at the very end of the production. So the game is pretty finished. It's already translated, right? And now you have this, usually, honestly, outsourced studio. Usually you outsource this QA to someone. For example, I worked on a game when I was in Sweden, and we were owned by an English company that had several studios, and the QA was done in Netherlands, in Holland. So specifically, Holland is part of Netherlands. So they were sitting in like in like Amsterdam, doing the QA mostly, and the translation was done, I believe, in like Dubai or something. Because the game was like in Arabic and so on as well. So they were doing that. Then these guys were QAing, right, testing bugs and so on, in Amsterdam. I was sitting in Sweden and doing the game design and the other stuff and so on, right? And this is a long story, but basically I ended up firing everyone in Amsterdam because it was so terrible. So it's not the video itself. But basically, we had to send it to them, right? We send them builds twice a week, and they couldn't test the whole build in 3 days. And they were obviously trying to get money from us. One issue is that sometimes when you outsource this thing, the studios, they're gonna be slow on purpose, right? Because if they do it too quickly, they feel they're done or whatever. So I was like, no, you have to finish each build in like maximum 2 days. It takes like, this is a mobile game, it takes like this many hours to do a full like spreadsheet. So I have written these macros, right? So what I've done is I've written these script macros in Google Spreadsheet. So you have to just fill in these tools, right? And then they update for you automatically. And I, as the manager, can see like the percentage of the macros, and I can see how good it is going and so on. And I had like an expected hourly, how much hour does it take for you to finish a full spreadsheet? And they basically did it like 2 weeks instead of 2 days, right? Sounds like you're fired basically. So it's another video, but my point is that you very often outsource this thing, right? And then what I'm gonna imagine is that Fire Emblem Engage is outsourced, right? And these people that have outsourced, or maybe it's like Nintendo in America or whatever, right? Who knows? But it's probably done in Japan, right? That's my general point here. It is not done in Japan, right? It's extremely unlikely have the actual been like Japanese developers or Japanese QA or whatever, right? They're sitting saying that I think Gold Mary is just too horny. Let's remove that. I don't know. Unica's text is, she's kind of way too into the dragon, man. Let's remove that. Very unlikely, right? It is everything's probably happening on this outsourcing team, right? Arguably not outsourcing, it's Nintendo then, but still kind of is. And like I said, right, the translators are probably not even have an opinion about it. They just like, translate Rosado's comment that she wants the dragon horn, so to speak, right? Like for example, I have this story where I worked on a video game and the player had a beacons, a beacon, right? Had to like torch a beacon, and the translator, for whatever reason, didn't know what a beacon was, so he thought it was bacon. So he translated every sentence with a beacon in the game to his word for bacon. So for example, let's say that bacon is kurukuduk, whatever, right, in his language, and beacon is blah blah blah. So instead of writing, blah blah blah, right, he wrote kurukuduk in every sentence that had to do with with beacons. Another time I was in a game, there was this woman I know very well. She had translated the word press, the button. Every time the game said press, she thought it said priest for some reason, which makes no sense. And she was almost fired for this, should have been fired for this, but she has basically had rewritten, so in everywhere in Dutch then, her name was Dutch, everywhere they're supposed to say press, she wrote priest, but her word for priest, right? I've seen a lot of these issues, right, with incompetent clumps and so on. But Fire Emblem, in end of the day, is really bad though, as I said, right, because not only is it clearly has an agenda driven, right, like they have decided probably in this side studio that they're gonna censor everything, censor romance, Rosado is too thirsty or whatever, yeah, they're censoring all the stuff, but at the same time, they've also removed a lot of words, right, and also clearly missed out on actual bugs. This is seriously one of the worst I've ever seen in my life, right, because it really, as I said, it really fills up so many issues. Even if you, as I mentioned in the beginning, even if you ignore all the romantic stuff, right, you ignore that it clearly has an agenda, they clearly decided that they're gonna remove all this, context for romance or love, whatever, right? As I went over, the character that are romantically involved with the main character are way less into it, right? So all the stuff is removed. They also miss out on bugs, right? Many bugs, and they have lazy down that stuff. I will say one thing though. Again, like the reason you're translating way earlier is also because you have to translate it before you record the audio, right? So you might be like, we have to record the audio for the characters in English. That's going to happen, let's say, 3 months before this thing. So the reason you translate stuff a lot earlier usually is because, well, we have to do also record audio, hire actors, so on. So the translators are usually like months ahead of everyone, right? I mean, they translate very, very early usually. And I guess I said then, is the end product is usually done by whoever is localizing it, right? They are finding bugs and so on. It's that place in the development where this stuff probably will be changed, where they are like, oh, why did they write that she wants, this stuff? Let's rewrite that. So it does feel just lazy, you know what I mean? I feel they're lazy. Like they just felt that, because one thing that can happen in a lot of games when you work on them is that maybe the English test, for example, or the German test especially, is way too long compared to the Japanese. So normally what happens with the German then is that the German words are much longer than the Japanese words. So you have to shorten them down, right? The translator gives you a German text, which let's say is 500 characters long, and it can only be like 300 characters long to fit in the game. So now it's your job as a localizer to rewrite that 500 comment to a 300 comment, right? Whereas it can't be in the game. And I think that's probably what they did. They probably had a lot of those things where they had to like shorten it down to become, more fitting into the game. And instead of shortening it down, let's say this scene here every tanks, maybe this was like 500, should be 300. And they were like, it's 500, let's make it 2. You know what I mean? They were like, okay, all tanks. That's how I feel they did it. Which, again, these people that work on the translation are terribly incompetent, right? Your job is to, at best as possible, try to make it 500 characters, right? Your job is to make it as close as possible to the original Japanese source. But again, I feel they're very, very lazy, probably incredibly lazy, where they instead went for, oh, we can't fit in the original Japanese to English translation because it's too long. Let's just remove it and say thanks or arg or it hurts, right? That's probably what they did. That's my explanation for it, and again, I think it's effing terrible, right? Etc. Plus then, censoring all the romance, most of the character, all romantic over the main character is removed, and also then, censoring characters like Gold Mary and Rosado, that they are less thirsty, they are less horny, or whatever, right? So it's a mess. It's a mess in every way possible. Anyway, hope you guys liked the video, hope you guys got insight, and I think that the way I explained the whole Excel sheet and so on, right? That is really how it works. I worked with this on more than 20 games, both as a translator, localizer, and as a manager, right? It's like sending out, hire people and so on. This is usually how it is. I would hire this translator way before the game is released. They will translate it, right? And then I would hire some testers, and they will test it way after. And like I said, also in my opinion, right? Of course, from when I design the games, I don't care, right? I don't care for a second about the opinion of the translator. I'm just like, translate my game, make it as true as possible. Okay, you're hired to do the Mandarin, right? Make the Mandarin be as close as possible to my English. I don't effing care if you dislike my Dragon Lady or whatever. I don't care, right? That's not your job. Your job is to translate stuff, right? Your job is not here to give me your opinions about it, right? Absolutely not. That being said, of course, someone tests the game, more so on the QA, and saying that, oh, this unit is too powerful, right? She's way too powerful. This Dragon Lady, she wins every fight too easily. Then I might be like, okay, maybe I have to nerf that character. So I'm not saying you don't listen to your employees or whatever, right? Or your staff or whatever. But it depends on what you're talking about. But I'm going to scrap and have a great day.